Before we dive into today's intense story, a quick reminder, over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't subscribed. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video. It really helps us out. I never imagined my life would come to this. I used to think I was one of those women who had everything under control, married young, raised two kids, managed a household, and spent every waking moment making sure everything looked perfect from the outside. But as the years passed, the perfection I tried to maintain started to crack in places even I could no longer ignore. And somehow, in all of that, I made a decision that changed everything. My name is Lean Carter. I'm 42 years old, a mother of two grown daughters, and I've been married to my husband Mark for over 20 years. We met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions, and mutual dreams of building a life together. For the longest time, I thought we were on the same page. We had a simple but stable life. Mark worked in finance, long hours that paid the bills and then some. I stayed home when the kids were little, then started a part-time job at a local boutique when they got older. Life was busy, predictable, and honestly a little dull. At some point, I stopped recognizing the man I married, or maybe I just started seeing him more clearly. He wasn't a bad person, just distant, always tired, more interested in his phone or the stock market than in me. I tried to be understanding. I told myself marriage was about compromise, endurance, loyalty. But there's a difference between being loyal and feeling invisible. It started with small things. He'd come home late and forget to let me know. Our conversations turned into brief check-ins about bills, groceries, or the kids. We stopped going out, we stopped laughing, and over time, I stopped trying. You don't realize how lonely you are until you spend day after day talking to everyone except the one person who's supposed to be your partner. It was around that time that the Thompsons moved in next door, a sweet family. Greg, his wife Melissa, and their teenage son Caleb. They had just moved from Arizona, and Greg worked as a contractor while Melissa taught online courses. Caleb was around 18 or 19, polite, quiet, and a bit awkward at first. He'd mow their lawn, help carry groceries for his mom, and occasionally wave to me when he saw me outside watering the plants. At first, I didn't think much of him. He was just the kid next door. But then Melissa had some surgery and needed help around the house. Mark was working late, as usual, and I had extra time during the afternoons. I offered to stop by and help. That's how I started seeing more of Caleb. He was kind, considerate in a way that felt rare. He'd thank me for the smallest things like bringing over soup or helping his mom fold laundry. One afternoon, I stayed a little longer than usual after helping Melissa with her medications. Caleb offered me tea. We sat in the kitchen and talked about music. He had an old soul, listened to jazz and classic rock, read books that most teenagers wouldn't touch. I was surprised. And for the first time in what felt like years, someone actually looked me in the eyes when I spoke. I didn't think anything of it. Not then. I told myself I was just grateful to be noticed, that it felt nice to have a real conversation with someone. But the more I saw him, the more those conversations lingered in my mind long after I left there. One day, I was walking my dog and saw Caleb fixing their fence. He waved, smiling, sweat beading on his forehead. I stopped to chat, and before I knew it, 20 minutes had passed. He asked me questions about what I like to cook, about my hobbies, about my dreams. I hadn't thought about those in years. I used to want to open my own cafe, maybe write a book. Life had a way of filing those dreams away in a dusty drawer I rarely opened anymore. Caleb seemed genuinely interested. He told me I had a light in me that people probably didn't notice enough. I laughed it off, said I was just a tired housewife, but he didn't laugh. He looked at me and said, "You're more than that. You still have time to do all those things, you know." It was such a simple thing to say, but it stayed with me. I started going over more often. Helping Melissa became a habit, and Caleb was always around. Our talks became more personal. I learned about his struggles, how he felt out of place with people his age, how he wanted to study psychology but wasn't sure his parents would support that path in turn. I shared things I hadn't said aloud in years about my marriage, my loneliness, my fear that I had wasted the best parts of myself on routines that no longer served me. Looking back, I don't think either of us intended for anything to happen. There was no plan, no flirtation at first. Just two people from different worlds connecting on a deeper level. But emotions have a way of creeping in when you least expect them. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. I'd brought over a casserole. Because Melissa wasn't feeling well, Caleb and I sat in the living room, talking as usual, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. He said something funny. And I laughed harder than I had in weeks. When I looked at him, I saw the way he was looking at me, not like a neighbor, not like an older woman. There was something different in his eyes, a gentleness, a warmth, maybe even admiration. I stood up quickly, muttered something about needing to check on my dog, and left. My heart pounded the whole way home. I told myself I was imagining things, that nothing was happening, that I was a grown woman who knew better. But that moment opened a door I couldn't close. Over the next few weeks, I tried to create distance. I made excuses not to go over. I took longer walks, stayed out of sight, but Caleb noticed. One day, he showed up at my door, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. He said they reminded him of me, soft but strong. I should have shut the door right there, but I did in single quotes t. Instead. I invited him in, just for a polite moment. We talked. Like we always did, but this time, there was a tension between us we couldn't ignore. He said he missed our conversations, that I made him feel seen, that he didn't care how old I was. He cared about who I was. I told him it was complicated, that I was married, that we lived next door to each other, that this couldn't happen. He nodded, said he understood, but then he added something that shook me. I don't want anything from you, Lean. I just don't want you to keep living like you don't matter. That night, I sat alone in the dark, thinking about everything, about how my husband hadn't noticed I'd been crying lately, how he hadn't asked me how I was feeling in months, about how the only person who made me feel alive was the one person I shouldn't be drawn to. It wasn't about infatuation. It wasn't even about love in the romantic sense. It was about being seen, being heard, feeling like I still had worth, and as wrong as I knew it all was, I couldn't help the way my heart felt lighter when I was around Caleb. We didn't cross any lines, not then, but emotionally, I was already somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, and that's how it began. I kept telling myself that I had it under control, that as long as nothing physical happened, I wasn't really doing anything wrong. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Emotional affairs can be just as real, just as destructive, and though I hadn't admitted it out loud yet, I had crossed that line the moment I began comparing Caleb to my own husband. After that evening when he brought me the flowers, I tried to avoid him again. I poured myself into chores, stayed later at work, even offered to visit my oldest daughter more often just to get out of town. But it wasn't just about avoiding him anymore. I was avoiding myself, avoiding the guilt, the shame and the uncomfortable truth that I had started to crave the attention of someone who should have been nothing more than a polite neighbor. Mark remained oblivious, not out of malice, but because he'd been absent in our marriage for years. I began noticing just how little we actually spoke. He didn't ask where I was going when I left. He didn't ask why I came home late. We were living side by side, but not together, just two people orbiting the same routine without ever really connecting. I suppose he trusted me so completely that he didn't feel the need to question anything. Or maybe he just didn't care enough to. One morning, Melissa called and asked if I could drive her to a doctor's appointment. She said Greg had a last-minute job and Caleb was at school. I hesitated, but of course I agreed. I still genuinely cared about her. When I picked her up, she looked pale and tired, and I silently scolded myself for letting things get so complicated when this woman had been nothing but kind to me. During the drive, she opened up more than usual. She mentioned how difficult it had been adjusting to a new town, how lonely she felt being away from her family. She even joked that Caleb had grown so fast she barely recognized him anymore. He's always talking about you, she said suddenly. He says you're the only one around here who actually listens to him. My stomach tightened. I forced a smile and said I was just trying to be a good neighbor, but the words stayed with me. Later that week, I was sitting alone in my backyard, sipping a cup of tea and watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. I heard the gate creak and looked up to see Caleb standing there. He had a book in his hand and that familiar gentle expression on his face. I found something I think you'd like, he said, holding out the book. I didn't take it right away. I just stared at him. Unsure what to do. Everything in me screamed that I should walk away, that I should put an end to whatever this was becoming. But instead, I reached out and took the book. We sat down, not too close, but not far either. He talked about why the story reminded him of me. Something about a woman rediscovering herself after years of silence. I listened, trying to focus on his words and not the way his presence made my heart race. When the conversation quieted, I told him I couldn't keep doing this, that it wasn't right, that it wasn't fair to my husband, to his parents, or even to him. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and said, I know. But can I ask you something? I said yes, hesitantly. Do you think you deserve to be happy? That question broke something inside me, because I didn't know how to answer it. For so long I'd been living for everyone else, my kids, my husband, even my neighbors. I couldn't remember the last time I had considered what made me happy. I didn't see Caleb for a while after that. I think we both understood that space was necessary. I focused on my family, tried to reconnect with Mark. I suggested date nights. I made his favorite meals. I even asked if he wanted to take a weekend trip. He responded politely, but there was no real effort from his side. Everything still felt mechanical, like we were following a script we'd both memorized long ago. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner, I asked him if he was happy. He looked at me, confused. Happy? He repeated, I mean, things are fine, right? Fine, I echoed, nodding slowly. That word stung more than I expected. That night, I sat awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who wrote poetry in her journal, the one who danced in the kitchen while cooking, the one who believed in love that actually felt alive. I didn't know where she had gone, but I missed her. A few days later, Caleb's mom stopped by to thank me for everything I'd done while she was recovering. She gave me a small potted plant, lavender, and said it reminded her of me, soft but resilient. That seemed to be the running theme of how people saw me, software, quiet, steady, but I didn't feel steady anymore. Later that week, I bumped into Caleb at the grocery store. It was awkward at first. We exchanged polite greetings and tried to make small talk, but then I noticed how tired he looked. He said his parents had been arguing more lately, and he wasn't sure what to do. I nodded, understanding that helpless feeling all too well. He asked if we could just talk like we used to. Nothing more. Just talk, I agreed. We sat in the parking lot in separate cars with our windows down, like two old friends catching up. There was no tension, no hidden intentions, just two people who understood each other in a world that often felt like it didn't care. That moment reminded me that connection doesn't always have to lead somewhere dangerous. Sometimes it just needs a space to breathe. But the truth was, I had already changed. This whole situation had changed me. I couldn't go back to pretending everything in my marriage was fine. I couldn't keep living a life that felt like an echo. I started writing again. Just a little. I bought a journal and kept it tucked in my nightstand. I wrote about my feelings, my regrets, my confusion. And Caleb, I wrote about him too, not in a romantic way, but in a way that acknowledged the role he'd played in waking me up. Still, the line between emotional dependence and deeper feelings is a fragile one. And as much as I wanted to believe I was strong enough to keep things platonic, part of me was still holding on to something I shouldn't have been. One evening, I was sitting on my porch when Caleb came by. He looked more nervous than usual. I'm leaving for college, he said, in 2 weeks. The words hit me harder than I expected. That's great, I said, forcing a smile. I'm proud of you, he nodded. I didn't want to go without saying goodbye properly. I knew what he meant. We both did. This was our last chance to find closure, or cross a line we couldn't come back from. I invited him to sit. We didn't speak for a long time, just sat there, side by side, watching the sunset. Finally, I turned to him and said, You're going to do great things. You have a kind heart, Caleb. Don't let anyone take that from you. He looked at me, and for a brief second, I saw the same look from before, the one that made my heart skip. I'll never forget you, he said quietly. I smiled, though my eyes were already misting over. And I'll never forget you. That was it. No dramatic goodbye, no forbidden kiss. Just two people letting go. When he left that night, I sat on the porch. Long after the stars had come out, I thought about all the moments that led us here. I didn't regret knowing him, I didn't regret the conversations, the way he made me feel seen again, but I knew now that I had to face my life head on, without leaning on someone else to fill the gaps I'd ignored for so long. Something had to change, and I had to be the one to change it. After Caleb left for college, the neighborhood felt quieter, not in the literal sense. Cars still drove by. Kids still played outside, dogs still barked at mail carriers, but in a way, only I could feel, there was a space left behind, not just in our neighborhood, but inside me. I didn't realize how much I'd grown used to his presence. Until he was no longer just across the yard. I didn't cry when he left. At least, not right away. I kept myself busy, filling my days with tasks I had long ignored, reorganizing the attic, repainting the hallway, even tackling the garden beds that had turned wild. It wasn't just a distraction, it felt like I was reclaiming something I had lost. I was waking up again, but this time for myself. Mark, as usual, noticed the changes, but didn't say much. One evening, after I spent the entire day in the garage sorting through old boxes, he looked up from the TV and said, "You've been more active lately." "That's good," I nodded. It was the most acknowledgement I'd gotten in weeks. I didn't blame him anymore, not entirely. We had grown apart slowly, over years of prioritizing everything and everyone else but each other. And once you start living as strangers under one roof, it's hard to remember how to come back together. But I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. I was starting to imagine something different for myself, something better. I still wrote in my journal every night. I'd light a candle on my nightstand, settle into bed, and pour out every emotion that had nowhere else to go. At first, the entries were filled with guilt and confusion, but as the weeks passed, they changed. I started writing about my childhood dreams, books I wanted to read, places I wanted to visit. I wasn't writing as someone's wife or mother. I was writing as me. I never told anyone about what happened between me and Caleb. I didn't need to. There was nothing salacious to confess, no scandalous affair. But I knew what had transpired emotionally, and I carried that truth quietly, not as a burden, but as a reminder of who I had been, of who I had become. Melissa invited me to dinner one evening, a small get-together with a few neighbors. I almost declined, unsure if I could sit through a night of small talk, but I went. Mostly because I wanted to see her. She had always been kind, and I had nearly ruined that friendship. When I arrived, she greeted me with a hug and a genuine smile. "It's good to see you," she said. "You've seemed distant lately." I told her I'd just been busy catching up on long overdue projects. It wasn't entirely a lie. She nodded and led me to the dining area, where a few others were already seated. We ate, we laughed, we talked about things that didn't matter, and for a while, I felt like part of a community again. Toward the end of the night, while we were cleaning up, she pulled me aside. "Caleb called yesterday," she said casually. "He said to tell you hello." I froze for a second. "Oh, yeah," she said. "He asked how you were doing. I think he really appreciated the way you looked out for him. You were a good influence." I swallowed hard. "Thanks. That means a lot." We didn't talk about it any further. But I knew that even if she suspected there had been more to our bond, she chose not to press. Maybe she trusted me enough to believe I'd done the right thing. Or maybe she simply didn't want to know. Winter came early that year. The mornings grew colder, and I found myself lighting fires in the fireplace just to keep the chill out of the air. With the holidays approaching, my daughters began planning their visits, and suddenly the house felt alive with anticipation. One evening, as I hung ornaments on the tree, Mark came in from the garage. He watched me for a moment, then walked over and picked up an ornament we'd bought the year we were married. "Remember this?" he asked. I looked at the tiny wooden cabin, painted red and white with our initials carved into the base. "Of course I do," I said. He hung it on the tree, then looked at me. "I know I haven't been the best husband lately, probably not for a long time." The honesty in his voice surprised me. "I guess I just thought we were doing okay because nothing was falling apart," he continued. "But I realize now that we haven't really been close, and that's on me." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him it was too late, that I'd already drifted too far, but another part of me appreciated the acknowledgement, even if it came after years of silence. "I've changed," I said softly. "I can see that," he replied, "and maybe I need to as well. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a grand declaration, but it was something, and for now, that was enough. As the months passed, I began focusing more on the things that brought me peace. I joined a local book club, took long walks every morning, and even started volunteering at the community center twice a week. I was rebuilding a life, not from scratch, but from somewhere deeper, a place I had long buried beneath duty and routine. Occasionally, I'd get a message from Caleb, short notes, asking how I was. Recommending a book or sharing a picture from campus, I always replied warmly but briefly. I wanted him to live his life fully without feeling tethered to whatever connection we had once shared. In one message, he wrote, "You help me see the kind of person I want to be. Thank you." I stared at that sentence for a long time, then I replied, "You help me to. In more ways than you'll ever know." And that was the last message we exchanged. Years passed. My daughters got married, and we welcomed grandchildren into our lives. Mark and I never became the couple we once were, but we found a new rhythm. We talked more, we laughed occasionally, and sometimes, we even held hands while watching television. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and I think that's what mattered most now. When I look back on that time in my life, I don't feel shame, I feel gratitude, not because I crossed boundaries, but because I woke up, because I stopped going through the motions, and started listening to the quiet voice inside me that had been ignored for too long. My story isn't about scandal or betrayal. It's about rediscovery. About learning that you can still grow, still feel, still change, even after decades of living a certain way. It's about the unexpected people who enter your life and stir something inside you, not to break you apart, but to remind you of who you are. Caleb was never mine to keep. He was a moment, a season, a mirror, and because of him, I found the courage to change the story I'd been telling myself. I'm still writing, not just in journals now, but little essays and short stories I submit to local magazines. Some get published, some don't, but that's not the point. The point is, I'm finally using my voice again, and that voice, once quiet, once buried, is now clear, steady, and fully mine.